Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and you know what time it is, and we're gonna get our midweek magic on. This week's midweek magic is gonna seem to get off to somewhat of a slow start. From Wizards, going first is always such a treat, but we are all going to have to go second sometimes. To help smooth things out in this alchemy event, the player who goes first will have their first land enter the battlefield tapped. Just take it easy for a turn. Not one of my favorite formats on Midweek Magic, but certainly an opportune time to talk about not only tempo as a deck archetype, but also about tempo lands, the ones that come into tap already, as well as how we can build a deck around this tempo treatment so that we have the most advantage we possibly can in this week's Midweek Magic. But before we get into all that, allow me to do the awkward thing and promote the channel. A while back, one of my viewers was kind enough to point out that we are the only channel putting out timely midweek magic content. So be sure to subscribe right here at the Planeswalker Stronghold for all of your future midweek magic needs, because we will be bringing you a deck list or strategy every single week. So what do you say we put all this aside and just get to that? So first off, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to talk about the tempo lands. And if you're not sure what that means, that is referring to these often common lands that come into play tapped, but maybe have some strategic advantage. Like Molten Tributary is part of a not basic land type, matters common tempo land that's out there. The blue-red deck unfortunately does not make any particular use of land types that I can recall of. So it doesn't really serve a huge purpose here. Swift Water Cliffs, on the other hand, is what we commonly refer to as one of the gain lands. So while it comes into play tapped, it also allows you to gain a life, which, of course, life is a good resource to have in this game, because if you don't, you've lost. This and other wonderful insights brought to you by the fine folks at Planeswalker Stronghold. One of my biggest complaints with the 2024 class of starter decks is the abundance of tempo lands. All of the decks, if I remember correctly, are running approximately 25 lands, 8 of which are common tempo lands. And like I said, in the case of the non-basic land types, they don't always serve a purpose in the deck. It's just coming into play tapped, and in a lot of cases, you'd just be better off having a mountain or an island. But this week with Slow Start, where if you are on the play rather than on the draw, your first land is going to come into play tapped anyway. So a little bit less of a downside in those instances. And when you take a deck like, is it Spells, for instance, really being on the draw over the play is often a big advantage anyway, because this deck is all about kind of getting a snowball effect of card advantage. I don't know that I would run 8. I think 6 is probably the upper limit here for these being useful. So on this, I would probably cut 2 of the tributaries and run an additional mountain and island on that to kind of smooth out your mana base there. In addition, if you end up running something in what we call the allied color pairs, another series of lands from Streets of New Capenna that you might want to consider are the draw lands. These, of course, do come into play tapped. They then produce one of 2 colors. Those are always going to be the allied color pairs on this. They haven't printed the enemy versions of this card, at least not that I'm aware of, and certainly not in standard. The interesting thing here that I think makes it better than the basic land types cards potentially is the late game ability to pay 4, sacrifice it, and draw a card. Because like we said, many times card advantage is what wins games. And sadly, the deck that I am eyeballing for this event is an enemy color pair, so that won't necessarily come into play. But even in a world where potentially you're looking at playing 3 colors, tossing in a couple of these to overlap your color pairs might be really quite interesting. The other side that we need to be considering in this slow start mini archetype is thinking about the deck archetype that we are choosing to run. The big 3, of course, being aggro, combo, and control. Aggro will tend to be a little disadvantaged in something like this because those decks often want to, or perhaps even need to, play an aggressive turn on their first turn, their second turn, their third turn, etc. And with the emphasis on tempo and lands coming into play tapped, you very likely are not going to be playing a threat on turn 1, and also turn 3 becomes a little bit questionable. Similarly, combo decks are not really supported by the starter deck new player experience. That is usually something that your collection will need to grow into. So at this point in the season, that is a little bit tougher for us to talk about as a budget alternative, particularly for such a short-lived micro format here, like we often see with midweek Magic. That, of course, leaves more of a control aspect. And what I am presenting today is the Is It Blue-Red Spells Matter sort of deck as a semi-control, also slightly more aggressive tempo style deck as an alternative. And as you can see here, the curve, even pretty much right out of the box, is pretty much a fit for what we're looking for. We have no spells that we are looking to play on turn 1. Our only 1-drop is Shore Up, and obviously you don't want to play that if it's not actually protecting a creature. We have a very heavy 2-drop curve where nearly all of these cards are really, really solid for us to do various things. Then on 3-drop, we start dropping off on our curve, having spells that we can play but aren't necessarily game-breaking. The main ones that we would really be incentivized to play on our own turn would be Chromho Seed Shark and, of course, our boy Hadi Jin. Everything else is kind of a situational sort of thing that doesn't necessarily need to be on turn 3. So if you find yourself in a position where you have a second tempo land in play, it's often better to play that on turn 3, play a 2-drop, and if you do have an untapped land, best case scenario, you'd also have Shore Up held up so you could protect your 2-drops if they are threatened. Then again, on 4 for our even number turns, you have a number of really strong threats. The Curator and the Urabrask both present pretty significant board positions. This deck also has some highly variable things going on, like Meeting of the Minds with its Convoke cost could be cast on turn 3 fairly easily, as is Tolarian Terror that will just continue to get cheaper. Now, if you notice, this deck currently has 62 cards in it. That's because I have cut the mana base down to 23 cards. I have also added in the Archaeologist as a 2-drop. From your new player experience, you've got two copies of that pretty much day 1, assuming you got all your decks. And also added 2 copies of a Rebel Salvo as a way to take out bigger threats. The affinity for equipment really isn't going to come into play here, but still as a 3-drop spell that deals 5 damage and turns off indestructible, is a very nice answer in a lot of situations. In order to get this back down to 60 cards, I'm actually going to drop from our 5-drop slot the Gandalf the Grey, which, don't get me wrong, is a great card, and if you don't mind alchemy stuff, this is certainly one you might want to consider including and maybe making a cut somewhere else. Less universally good is Najal the Stormrunner. I think this is a fairly easy cut in most cases, and that brings us back down to 2. And if we were to move the Tolarian Terror over here and start thinking of it as more of a 3-4 or maybe even lower drop, you can see this becomes a very aggressive tempo-oriented curve. And with some testing, we might even consider cutting a couple more lands, maybe even as many as 5 if we could just get down to a 1-2-3 drop format. The Terror obviously fits in there pretty well, as would Meeting of the Minds. So really we're talking about maybe cutting 3 spells here to get down to a much more aggressive curve, and then backfilling with 3rd and 4th copies of some of these particularly 2 drops for this Tolarian Terror, more shore ups, a number of different ways that you could go with that. And of course, there are other things from your new player experience. Mercurial Spelldancer, Felden, Herbrast's Forge, Rampaging Raptor, and Dragonwing Glider are all rare or better cards from your new player experience that could very easily find a home in a deck like this. Or if you wanted to go in and further trim away some of the alchemy-based cards and make this more of a standard playable deck, all of those are well worth consideration. And as you can see, most of these fit into that 2-3 drop slot. Rampaging Raptor is, of course, a 4-drop that is, well, double red. Dragonwing Glider also double red, and maybe a 4-4 for red is not where this deck wants to be, but I think it's at least worth experimenting around with. And hey, just in case you didn't catch all that, Matt would like you to know that the deck list that we discussed in this video is going to have a link down in the doobly-doo to take you over to EtherHub, along with a link to any other alternative lists that you might wish to consider. He only asks that you give it a little thumbs up when you're over there checking out the deck list. And I plan on live playing this event on Wednesday at 11 a.m. over on my Twitch channel, so definitely stop in and check it out. Because the Stronghold is so much more than just a YouTube channel, and you can find links to all of our other social media outlets in our profile. Because at the end of the day, we're all budget players. And as a community, we're stronger together. So like, comment, subscribe, follow, do all those things to show a little love. It's appreciated more than you know.